There is no question that the president has set an extraordinarily high bar with respect to transparency in government. And while I think there have been certainly some shortcomings in execution, and Sarah mentioned a number of those that we would certainly agree with, I think he has begun to make a significant change in the culture of what openness means, and moved the default of where government information is from being in the hands of government into citizens' hands. In the 21st century, given the new technology, things are no longer considered public by anyone unless they're online. And I think the administration has clearly endorsed that sort of fundamental cultural shift in information and transparency. It's a sea change, frankly, not just from the previous administration. I'm sort of asked that question all the time, which is, wow, how different is it from the previous administration? I say, forget the previous administration. This is a sea change in, my decades of experience of Washington, probably in government, across, government since the beginning. The important thing I think that's happening with the administration are not the individual things that they are making available, as important as they are. But it is the fact that they are beginning to hardwire this default of openness into government. And as Sarah said, 50%, 70% of this battle has to do with changing the culture of Washington, changing the culture of people who work in the White House, in Congress, in the executive, so that their default is one of openness. But the key achievement for me is that on day 2 of the administration, the president issued an order and said, this is a priority for my administration. I could have think of a lot of other things he might have done on day 2, but this is what he did. And I think that is the signature accomplishment. And it also gives us as advocates a flagpole against which to measure progress, which of course we always do. I want to sort of just repeat, my colleague Clay Johnson came into my office this morning and he said, it may be more important that this issue of openness is a cultural one rather than a policy one or a legislative one. Transparency is not an issue, it's actually a value. And I think that's what the administration has embraced and what's absolutely key about their successes. There have been tremendous successes. I'll mention a few that haven't been mentioned. The very notion of establishing data clearinghouses, flawed though they are, data.gov and recovery.gov, the very fact that they exist is a significant accomplishment. Now we know how bad and how dirty the data is, or how irrelevant it is, or whether it existed before, but at least there is something we can say exists and is collecting and gathering data, and again, it illustrates the default that the data belongs in our hands online. I think the notion of accountability dashboards, which are available on various websites. The White House is going to have one for the Open Government Directive. There now exists one on the IT spending across government. Again, gives citizens a handle into understanding, in this case, how our money is spent. Who's doing well with their expenditures, who's not. Again, it's a sort of default position. I think the notion of webcasting meetings, holding conference calls, inviting citizens in pretty much unfiltered to view and participate in decision making, again, is a significant change. And that is not to say that there are going to be that all decisions are going to be made in the open, but there is far more insight and ability to participate than we've ever seen before. And I think certainly a lot of this is due to the use of technology, and the administration certainly gets that. I don't want to pass by in terms of other accomplishments, other things that largely Norm has been responsible for, restrictions on what lobbyists can do and what they can't do, and finding ways to do them that are constitutional. I think that is a significant issue in Washington, and the White House is leading the way on that. Posting things like waivers to the existing rules. Everybody has to have an out. The administration said sometimes we're going to issue waivers to people we bring into the administration, all of that is now online. And again, I think that's, if you're, interested in digging, as Sarah and her colleagues are, and many of my colleagues at Sunlight, information is now there to tell you, not only who is visiting the White House, but where did people work, how much are they making, et cetera. And that's all just very interesting stuff. I think on things that are not being done as well, and we've talked about FOIA, the backlog may be reducing, and maybe this is a snowball effect, and we'll see the backlog moving more quickly. The sort of openness of government deliberations. The White House was criticized for taking all the healthcare, most of the healthcare deliberations behind closed doors. I actually think there are some decisions which should not be broadcast, so we can actually have real decisions be made as opposed to playing to the cameras all the time. But we have to find a way to engage in a more routine way, I think, with people who want to engage in those discussions. And I think on my list was a failure to push for more systemic lobby reform. Well, we actually got that last night from the president, so we're certainly excited about that. And finally, I think the one biggest failure from Sunlight's point of view is the lack of progress on something that the president promised called ethics.gov, a single website where we would have what we envision as, campaign finance, lobbying disclosure, all of the influence data that is brought to bear on our elected officials in a single place. And that's certainly top in our list for the new year, this year.